My presentation is called Stories from the Front in the Battle for Constructivism. And it's going to be an account of my experiences and those of my deceased wife, Barbara Scales, who was also a member of the society. And both of us came from politically progressive and bicultural backgrounds, which made us inclined towards constructivism. Barbara had 50 years of teaching and educational experience and was an artist her entire life, and which informed her approaches to teaching. I had 10 years of professional educational experience, but many other associations with constructivism beyond those 10 years. My introduction to education starts at Far West Laboratory for Educational Research and Development. That was one of 9 laboratories nationwide set up by the Johnson administration to attack public issues such as poverty. During the early 70s, I worked for the Responsive Educational Program, a national Head Start and follow-through program. It was a program designed to be responsive to children's interests, backgrounds, learning styles, and general physical, intellectual, social, and emotional needs. It had a constructivist orientation. There were other Head Start programs being developed at other laboratories that were not constructivist in orientation. In fact, some were downright behavioristic. Program development and training is what I was mostly involved in. I worked throughout the country with school boards, superintendents, teachers, parents, and all local stakeholders to implement the responsive educational program. The implementation was challenged by the fact that constructivism was a new approach to education. It was also challenged by the fact that the implementation of this innovation needed to be accomplished through existing educational institutions, which in many cases were hostile to and or ignorant of the people they were trying to serve, who were often people of color within poor communities. However, we learned and we persevered. While poverty, racism, and an unequal distribution of opportunities are still with us, Head Start is one of the few enduring results of the war on poverty. There were missteps along the way. One was a failure to understand the enormous pressures of racism and poverty. Another was the widely held belief that poor people didn't raise their children properly, and this was the cause of their poverty. During the 60s and 70s, Barbara finished her bachelor's degree in art and English and started working in a Berkeley preschool with a play-based curriculum and constructivist curriculum. After getting her teaching credentials, she taught in junior high school. And when Berkeley High created a cluster of alternative schools called tribes, she joined the faculty of a tribe with an art-based curriculum. Meanwhile, back at the laboratory, the National Institute of Education gave the laboratory a grant to create training materials to help teachers develop the competencies needed to implement the responsive education program. This system was called the Flexible Learning System. These were shelf materials, meaning that they could be bought, but possibly not used. The 4 videotapes, the Growing Mind series, which JPS offers as an incentive to join, were developed by me as part of the Flexible Learning System. While I was developing the Flexible Learning System, Barbara got a job at the Child Study Center, the laboratory school of the Institute of Human Development. She worked under the direction of Thelma Harms, a widely recognized constructivist. She became eventually the head teacher and later the acting director. After I was finished with the Flexible Learning System, I took a position in the Teacher Centers Exchange. Teacher centers were places where teachers could gather to support and learn from each other. Teacher centers might be a better way to transform educational practice than making products like the Flexible Learning System. The Teacher Centers Exchange was established at Far West Laboratory as a networking entity linking together centers throughout the United States who shared similar premises and purposes. We functioned like concierges, hooking up and physically connecting people who had similar issues to work on and shared similar views of education. While working in the Teacher Centers Exchange, I was approached by some local administrators who wanted to have a 1-week live-in seminar, Summer Institute, to introduce teachers in three counties to Piaget's theory. I was the program chairperson. I organized the retreat around core groups led by recognized local Piagetian scholars. There were 5 core groups with about 60 teachers in each group. Professor Millie Almy, a former student of Piaget and faculty at Cal, selected Barbara Scales as one of her facilitators. About this time, I joined the Association for Constructivist Teaching. Its main premise was that if you were going to teach constructivism, you needed to use constructivist methods. One of its founders was Professor Paul Ammon, who introduced me to Piaget, and Professor Ammon also developed the Developmental Teacher Education Program at Cal. This is a teacher training program focused on constructivism as both content and approach to teacher training. Physicists and mathematicians played an important role in spreading the constructivist tenets. The following are some of my experiences while still at the laboratory. The Mountain View Center for Educational Development for Environmental Education, the Mountain View Center for Environmental Education. This was a Colorado-based center developed by physicist David Hawkins and his wife Frances. Frank Oppenheimer, physicist and brother of Robert, who directed the Manhattan Project, founded the Exploratorium in San Francisco. This is a hands-on science museum. Physicist Robert Karplus developed a science curriculum study, a hands-on science curriculum focused on constructivist principles. He also founded the Lawrence Hall of Science, another Bay Area hands-on museum. Mathematician Seymour Papert, a self-proclaimed constructivist, was a mathematician and computer scientist at MIT, using computers as learning tools for young children. Jonas Langer's Piaget reading seminar was started in 1968 and continued to 1986. I attended for 15 years, including 3 after graduation. We read original works by Piaget, meeting once a week. Professor Langer was a postdoctoral student of Piaget and a member of JPS. Many members of JPS attended the seminar. Professor Juan Pascual Loioni, who earned his PhD with Piaget after a career as a psychiatrist and medical doctor, developed neo-Piagetian theory. He was a guest instructor at Cal, and I attended all his courses. The school thereafter hired Robbie Case, a student of Juan, and he became my advisor and dissertation chair. Barbara was interested in how the environment facilitated play. She made outdoor play a center part of her curriculum, and she asked not how can play support the curriculum, but how can the curriculum support play, believing that play was the primary vehicle of learning for young children. The Child Study Center attracted the attention of Prentice Hall, who asked Barbara to write a practical book on how to make play the center of the curriculum. That led to Play at the Center of the Curriculum with 4 authors. I was one of them, and it's now in its 6th edition. It's a social political struggle to keep play in the lives of children. And it's been quite an encouragement that we've had as many as 6 different editions of this book. Barbara and I and another Child Study Center head teacher taught University of California extension courses for a number of years. Our students were already working in early childhood education. Barbara focused on assessing children's development through observing their solitary and collective play, art, and expressive behaviors. My focus was on teaching students to recognize in children's play and art manifestations of Piaget's epistemology. Many of our friends contributed to constructivism in the language arts. Barbara herself created curriculum to assist children in expressing their understanding of the world through narrative and dramatic constructions. Lynn Landor was a student of Betty Halpern at Sonoma State. Betty came from the Bank Street at Columbia, a well-known example of constructivist education. For her master's thesis, Lynn developed a program called Children's Own Stories, where children became published authors. This program was implemented in many schools in California. Professor Celia Ganeshi at Columbia University wrote books and did research to promote constructivist language curricula. Professor Ann Haas-Dyson from the University of Illinois used qualitative and social linguistic research to examine the use of written language by children as they constructed their understanding of their social world and popular culture. Vivian Paley was a kindergarten teacher at the University of Chicago Laboratory School. She wrote volumes on her observations of young children, and particularly of their developing language and socialization. Barbara was a friend and had her out to Berkeley on a number of occasions. She was also a plenary speaker at one of our yearly meetings. She's evidence that you don't have to be a Piagetian to be a constructivist. She told me she thought Piaget was a watch, which it is, but he is not. William Casaro did research and writing about how children create culture that reflect their understanding of the world. He worked with Barbara at the Child Study Center. In conclusion, many have been moved by Piaget and have been part of the attempt to bring constructivism to education. Many have been and are members of JPS. Terence Brown, Rita DeVries, Constant, Camille, Eleanor Duckworth are a few. There are many others who mattered and continue to matter. The constructivist thrust was no doubt buoyed by Piaget, but it emerged in a broader context of the cognitive and social sciences, which included many others such as Vygotsky, Brunner, Dio Hebb, Edward Tolman, and psycholinguists like Chomsky, Slovin, Kotz, and Fodor, and later ethnographers like Susan Irvin Tripp and William Casaro. At an earlier time, cognition and ethnography were not acceptable subjects or approaches. Learning theory dominated the psychology department of Cal until they let in people like Jonas Langer and Dan Slovin. I remember these days vividly and painfully. However, there were strong currents which heralded forth constructivism. Learning theory had to move over for the cognitive sciences and constructivism. However, the good fight is still being fought, so sally forth. Yeah.